Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This is going to be my video all about Spider-Man 3 bringing back Jamie Foxx's Electro character. That's right, big time Sinister 6 action, so I'll explain what's going on. It's crazy that they're finally canonizing some Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man franchise to the MCU, but they did it with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. We'll do a new Amazon giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your favorite moment from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. Everyone cue up the clip of Andrew Garfield just waiting in the wings to get that phone call to come back himself. So just starting with the big stuff first, number 5, Hollywood Reporter announced that Marvel is bringing back Jamie Foxx's Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for Spider-Man 3, the same way that they brought J. Jonah Jameson back from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. This obviously seems like more live-action Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse Easter eggs as Marvel pushes deeper into multiverse storytelling. Originally, the character was going to be a member of the Sinister 6 team that they were creating in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. At the time, Sony had plans for both Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield and for a spin-off Sinister 6 movie franchise. Drew Goddard, the person behind the Netflix Daredevil series, was going to do the Sinister 6 movie, and even though there weren't a lot of plot details for that movie other than the roster that they teased in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 post-credit scene, being Green Goblin putting the team together made up of Vulture, Dr. Octopus, Rhino, Electro, and Kraven the Hunter. What ended up happening with that, though, is that obviously we all know that they decided to not do Amazing Spider-Man 3 and recast Tom Holland when they went to Captain America Civil War. So cut to a couple years later, Tom Holland shows up in Civil War, and then you have your brand new Spider-Man franchise. However you felt about the Amazing Spider-Man films, Andrew Garfield himself actually says that he feels like he's kind of heartbroken with the way that they treated the character. It's actually pretty sad. Listen to the clip of him talking about it.
That's something that happened with that experience for me, where it was story and character were actually not top of the priority list ultimately.
Got it. Yeah.
And I found that really tricky. I signed up to serve the story and to serve this incredible character that I've been dressing as since I was 3.
Yeah.
And then it gets compromised and it breaks my heart.
Story and character, not so important, so it just sounds like they're trying to freshen up a lot of Amazing Spider-Man elements inside the MCU. Give them a good polish. And speaking of MCU crossover, thanks to the Sony leak a number of years ago, we actually found out that when Amy Pascal was still head of the Sony studio, she actually phoned him up and had him read the Amazing Spider-Man 2 script, look at some of the dailies, and give them advice on how to make the movie better. I'll explain what he said because he actually spoke a lot about Jamie Foxx's Electro character when he gave them notes on Amazing Spider-Man 2. So it is kind of bringing things full circle that Kevin Feige sees Electro come into the MCU full-blown. But number 4, just to clarify, the report is that they're bringing Jamie Foxx back as his version of Electro. They're not going to do a rebooted version of the character with a brand new origin story. I know that when they brought J. Jonah Jameson back in the Spider-Man Far From Home post-credit scene, he looked different, and they were going for more of a vlogger thing by turning the Daily Bugle from a traditional newspaper into a video podcast sort of website. But that wasn't meant to be a big multiverse twist, so it sounds like the Electro inclusion won't be a big multiverse twist. They'll find a way to incorporate his pre-existing backstory that we got during Amazing Spider-Man 2 into the MCU and explain how he's connected to the other MCU characters, the way that other Sinister 6 characters like Mysterio were connected to Iron Man during Spider-Man Far From Home. Like he used to work for Stark Tech, got a little bit crazy, Tony Stark wound up firing him, and that's when he turned into the villain that he is in the movie. And even though his backstory during The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was that he worked for Oscorp, and obviously we want to get to Oscorp, Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, and the MCU eventually, in the original comics, he actually worked for Stark Industries, so them saying that he used to work for Iron Man just like Mysterio, just in a different department, wouldn't be too far off. The way that J.K. Simmons explained his post-credit scene, though, is that he's supposed to be the same J. Jonah Jameson from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, just a little bit older with less hair. And at some point in the last 15 years or so, since the events of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 3, at least the time period, the Daily Bugle just evolved into what it is during the Spider-Man Far From Home post-credit scene. But the way the MCU works is that Tom Holland is the very first version of Spider-Man, so even though he's coming from the Tobey Spider-Man films, it's just that time period. So Jamie Foxx will be the same version of Electro, but his backstory will be sort of weaved in with MCU history so that it all makes sense and it's all in continuity. In explaining the Kevin Feige connection to Electro a little bit more, one of the biggest notes that he gave them on the script for Amazing Spider Man 3 in the dailies was that he liked a lot of the stuff that they were doing with Jamie Foxx's Electro. He liked his performance, but he thought that they got a little too crazy and a little too over the top with him at times. Like when he's going crazy in his room here, starting to go real nutty. This was one of the things that Kevin Feige told them to get rid of. Obviously, you can see that stayed in the movie. They didn't take a lot of his notes, so now that Kevin Feige has control of these characters and he's going to be using the Electro character, he can polish him up however he wants. The reason why Amy Pascal came to Kevin Feige for help with Amazing Spider Man 2 when they were running into problems with that movie is because Kevin Feige was a producer on the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies with Sony before Marvel Studios became the big studio that it is today. But number 3, obviously the next question is because they've now canonized elements of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man movies and Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man movies to the MCU, will they eventually bring back both Tobey and Andrew in another new Spider-Man movie at some point, like live-action Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? Amy Pascal said that the studio had discussed doing live-action Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse before, but because the animated movie traded so heavily on Miles Morales, I had actually assumed that any live-action version of that movie would include him, and they haven't said anything about introducing him in a bigger way in the MCU yet. But here's the thing, if you actually listen to a lot of the behind-the-scenes of the animated Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, the producers said that they tried to bring back Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, and Tom Holland's versions of Spider-Man to incorporate more live-action versions of Spider-Man in the multiverse in a bigger way. Like, there were a couple live-action scenes that they incorporated into that. Apparently, they had much bigger plans, but at the time, around 2016 or 2017, when they were pitching that idea to Sony about bringing all the Spider-Men back, they said that the Sony executives said that it was too soon to do a crossover like that. Right now, though, is just Electro coming back from the Amazing Spider-Man movies for what seems like more Sinister Six setup. They haven't said anything about Kraven yet in the movie other than hinting that he might be one of the villains. The news reports didn't say if Electro is supposed to be the main villain, but you don't bring someone back that big for just a 2-second cameo. So it sounds like whatever he's doing during the events of Spider-Man 3, it'll be a bigger storyline than what JJ got in that post-credit scene, screaming about how terrible Spider-Man is. Number 2, right now the Sony people have already said that they're setting up an MCU Sinister Six team, but they're also using the Morbius movie and Venom 2, the other Venom spin-off movies, to do that as well. The current roster that they have right now is the Vulture, Scorpion, Shocker, and Mysterio. There are a lot of hints that they gave us that Mysterio isn't actually dead at the end of that movie, or at least a version of Mysterio will come back at some point, because you have his henchman, another Stark Tech employee that stole all of Mysterio's files, and Mysterio is kind of like a mask that someone wears. He isn't an actual supervillain. It's all smoke and mirrors, so to speak. Supposedly the reason why the Vulture shows up in the Morbius movie after showing up in the Spider-Man Homecoming post-credit scene in that same white prison jumpsuit is because at some point in the movie, Morbius is supposed to be sent to the prison where Vulture is being held with the Scorpion. But even though they've said that they're doing Sinister Six stuff in the MCU, they didn't say when they're doing that. Like, a lot of people have wondered if Spider-Man 3 will be a Sinister Six movie, or if they'll just be setting up more Sinister Six characters, and they'll leave that for Spider-Man 4. So number 1, WTF, obviously, does that mean that Spider-Man 4 will be the full-blown Spider-Man vs. the Sinister Six movie? Because it sounds like their Spider-Man vs. Venom movie will be something different. But for those of you that don't know about Spider-Man 4, a while ago, when Sony and Marvel made nice and they signed a new sharing deal to share the Spider-Man character, the president of Sony was asked about doing future deals with Marvel. Will you continue to share Spider-Man after the next movies that you've signed for? And he said yes. So right now the contract for Marvel using Spider-Man with Sony is that they get him for Spider-Man 3 and another crossover movie in the MCU that's kind of a mystery. They haven't said which movie he's going to show up in. But after the mystery crossover movie is when Sony and Marvel would have to sign another new sharing deal for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Spider-Man 3 is supposed to start filming later this year, pretty soon, according to Tom Holland, so we'll get some more news about that really soon. Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness, will also start filming very soon. Big Spider-Man Easter egg too, Sam Raimi, Mr. Spider-Man himself from the Tobey era, will be directing Doctor Strange 2. So there is a lot of Spider-Man related stuff happening in the next couple of years. So everyone, let me know in the comments, what do you think about them bringing Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2, and which other characters do you want them to canonize from the Andrew Garfield era? I know everyone's just going to say, bring Andrew Garfield back in some fashion. While you wait for everything, click here for that brand new Avengers WandaVision trailer and Easter eggs, and click here for that brand new Mandalorian Season 2 trailer and Star Wars Easter eggs. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe. This is The Way.